Down in Tucson, there is a particular block where million-dollar estates line the road. Residents here stay tucked behind security gates. Every home has backup alarms for their main alarms. Gardeners show up like clockwork. Folks living here recognize every vehicle and daily habit, noticing even the slightest shift. By any standard, it is among the most protected communities in the nation. Yet, in the middle of the night, an 84-year-old lady was snatched away. Right on that same street, very close to where Nancy Guthrie was abducted on the evening of January 31st, 2026, sits a rented home. There were tenants staying at that residence for a while. You would see people coming and going. A vehicle sat in the drive. They appeared to have a legitimate reason for being there. But eventually, they just vanished. And figuring out exactly when they left is a massive, unsolved piece of this puzzle. Federal agents have circled back to that area multiple times now. They have been canvassing the neighborhood. Their inquiries have been very pointed. So pointed, in fact, that 2 different residents flagged this specific house without talking to each other. They were so specific that 2 top-tier national investigators wrote stories on it the same week, reaching totally opposite results. The details were enough for retired Pima County SWAT leader Bob Krieger to tell Parade that such a spot might have functioned as a command center or prep site for the individuals who snatched Nancy Guthrie. We are currently examining every confirmed detail regarding this empty residence. We will look at the neighbors who spoke up, the pros who weighed in, the journalists on the beat, and the physical evidence a staging point usually leaves. Afterward, we will focus on the single mystery the Bureau has yet to clarify. What exactly did they discover once they stepped inside? That quietness says a lot. It is definitely not a dead end. It never is. To be perfectly clear before we continue, any part of this report, not officially verified by police, is presented as our own analysis, expert theories, or remaining mysteries. No individual mentioned in this segment has been labeled a person of interest or a suspect in Nancy Guthrie's case by the cops. We are here to probe. We do not make accusations. Let us lay out the schedule because the order of these statements and events is vital to the story. For several weeks, federal teams have been scouring Nancy Guthrie's neck of the woods. As we mentioned before, they gathered doorbell camera clips and spoke with residents. They pointedly asked neighbors about anything caught on camera on January 11th. They poked around regarding January 24th. They reconstructed the events leading up to February 1st. By the 7th week of the search, things shifted. One particular house became a major focal point. To grasp why this is so critical, you need to understand the layout of the area. The Catalina foothills is not the kind of place where outsiders can just vanish into a crowd. It is a high-end, exclusive area. The properties are quite spread out. The roads are winding and do not attract random people just out for a stroll. If you are not a resident or there for a job, people notice you, which is why those neighbor reports are so incredibly important. Senior reporter Brian Enton from News Nation has been stationed in Tucson for weeks, building deep ties with investigators. On his March 17th podcast, Brian Enton Investigates, he noted that federal agents returned to the block to re-interview neighbors. He mentioned that a certain neighbor moved away just before Nancy went missing, and the Bureau is digging into that specific departure. Hello everyone, thanks for tuning into the channel. I truly value you being here. Please hit that subscribe button. Your support means everything. It is now day 45 in the hunt for Nancy Guthrie, which feels surreal. We are officially a month and a half out from her disappearance on February 1st. I have learned about a few fresh updates today. I have confirmed through my own contacts that federal agents were back in Nancy Guthrie's community over the past day, circling back to houses and pushing for more info. One thing I know they are focusing on is a neighbor who moved out right before Nancy vanished. They have been digging into the details of that move. I am not saying it is definitely connected to the crime, but the feds are certainly making it a priority. While that might not be linked to the abduction, the FBI is definitely looking for answers there. A resident left shortly before Nancy was taken. Now, the Bureau is scrutinizing that whole situation. Enton was very careful with his words. He was not making accusations. He was simply reporting on a very active part of the ongoing police work. But there is a takeaway here. Federal investigators do not burn time or resources on things that are irrelevant to their investigation. They are not going back to a crime scene 7 weeks later just to check boxes that do not matter. When the Bureau starts drilling down on a specific house, there is a reason. Anton's caution adds context. It certainly does not make the lead any less important. The reality of this neighborhood is that the residents are very observant. They have kept a close watch since February 1st, and some were paying attention long before that. Aldine Meister has called the Catalina foothills home for nearly 30 years. When you have lived in one spot that long, you know the area's heartbeat. You recognize every car and every delivery truck. You can feel it in your gut when something is just not right. Meister shared something with Brian Anton that I suspect will be a pivotal piece of evidence in this whole case. She mentioned that the people living on the other side of her place moved out. As she told it, she practically begged the police to search that specific house. She really wanted them to look at that property. She kept pushing for them to inspect it because it had just been sitting there empty. Right. Other than that, though, no. Nobody else is really discussing that house. She did not even wait for the cops to ask her about it. She was telling Anton about a concern she had from the start. She had already pointed it out. She had looked at that vacant property and decided for herself that it needed a thorough walkthrough. That is a very important detail. Her suspicion was natural and came early on, but Meister gave the feds another piece of the puzzle. This part gets even more vital given what the Bureau is currently asking about that house. Roughly 3 weeks before Nancy Guthrie was taken, Meister was outside when she spotted a man she did not recognize. She could not get a good look at his face. He had a hat pulled down low to hide his looks. He was just strolling down the path, but then he stopped and stared at Nancy's place for a long time. She told Anton the guy just looked out of place. Did you see anything odd in the area before all this went down? I actually did, about 2 weeks prior. I have a big window in my bathroom where I watch people walk by every morning, and I saw this weird guy with his cap pulled way down. He was kind of slouched, and he definitely was not dressed for a hike. He was just in regular clothes. I thought it was strange because it just did not fit the vibe here. And that really grabbed your attention? Oh, absolutely. I even mentioned it to my husband and my mom. Definitely. How often do you see something weird enough to actually bring it up to someone? Not very often. Usually, I just see the same familiar faces, my friends. So, no. I think maybe once about 12 years ago, I saw someone strange. Did you report that to the cops? I did. I told the federal agents the very next day they arrived, and we went over all of it. She gave that info to the police. We do not know yet what they did with her tip at the time. It remains unclear if the profile fits any current suspects. Whether the individual spotted by Meister is actually linked to that empty rental, the person caught on the FBI's camera, or Nancy Guthrie's case is still a mystery. Police haven't validated any of those theories yet. Here are the facts. A long-term local living here for 30 years noticed a stranger acting out of place 3 weeks prior to the abduction, flagged it, and by the time federal agents investigated that empty home, Meister had been sounding the alarm for a while. Investigators are focused heavily on January 11th, the specific day Nancy's relatives urged everyone to recall their whereabouts during that 3-week period, creating a situation that's impossible to overlook. Former federal investigator Jennifer Kidnapper openly suggested that the individual seen on the porch on January 11th was probably conducting a practice session. The person Meister observed was wandering the area during that exact time frame. While we aren't claiming these events are definitely linked, it's clear the authorities are looking at the same timeline we've put together. Locals were keeping their eyes peeled. The real mystery is if someone was observing them in return. It turns out Aldine Meister wasn't the only one on the block keeping tabs on that specific house. During another discussion with Brian Anton, a resident named Laura explained that she'd also been watching that rental and saw when things shifted. This is what she shared with the reporter. While leases are rare in this area, one nearby property stood out because the occupants vanished right around the time the incident occurred. When she mentions a few days, she's referring to the window surrounding Nancy Guthrie going missing. She realized something was up because of a vehicle. The tenants owned a car that suddenly disappeared one morning. According to her, they must have left shortly before since the driveway was empty. I figured it might be unimportant, but I decided to reach out anyway. I wanted to inform them that the residents who were there just a bit ago had suddenly packed up and left. Consider her story for a second. She spotted a minor oddity and at first tried to brush it off as nothing special. That's a totally normal way to react when you see something strange in a quiet, safe neighborhood. Yet, she placed the call regardless because the timing felt wrong. Seeing that vacant driveway while chaos broke out nearby convinced her that the authorities needed to be briefed. At that moment, she had no clue her tip might be a key piece of a major kidnapping case. She was simply a concerned citizen trusting her gut feeling. I want to focus closely on the exact words she used, as they are crucial for the next part. She mentioned the tenants left within a short window of the event. That statement is actually quite vague regarding the timing. It leaves us wondering if they left prior to or following February 1st. The wording could easily apply to the period just before the snatching occurred. Conversely, it might refer to the 48 hours right after. Keep that uncertainty in mind, because it's about to become a major point of contention. Reporter Brian Entin claimed the residents departed before Nancy vanished. However, on Nancy Grace's show, journalist Dave Mack offered a totally conflicting account. This is what Mack actually stated. At this specific rental, the occupants fled right after Nancy Guthrie was taken. You can interpret that however you like, but the fact is they stayed until the crime happened and then vanished. Let that sink in. We've got Brian Entin, a top reporter for News Nation with deep ties to the Tucson probe, asserting that the tenants left before the disappearance. Then there's Dave Mack from a major national show, insisting they moved out right after Nancy Guthrie was snatched. Is it before or after? These aren't just random internet commenters. Both men are respected journalists who have spent weeks on this story, yet they are providing totally opposite versions of the same event. So, why is this distinction so vital? You might think a move out near a kidnapping is sketchy no matter what. That's true, but these two possibilities lead to very different questions for the detectives. If the house was empty before February 1st, meaning nobody was there when Nancy was taken, the FBI has to wonder if that spot served as a base for scouting and prep work. If the place was leased just to provide a hideout while someone tracked her habits and daily schedule, then leaving before the hit fits that narrative perfectly. Their job there was done. The monitoring phase ended, so there was no point in hanging around. That version suggests a highly methodical and organized crime that took weeks of careful preparation. We're talking about professional criminals following a script. But look at the alternative. If the tenants stayed until January 31st and bolted right after February 1st, the entire focus of the probe shifts. This possibility makes you wonder if those occupants had some level of knowledge, either directly or indirectly, about the crime that was about to unfold. The timing of their exit links them physically and chronologically to the abduction. Leaving before implies scouting. Leaving after suggests they were running away. Either way is scary, but each requires a unique police strategy. We can't settle this debate because we don't have the paperwork or the rental agreements. The identity of the tenants remains a mystery. So far, the police haven't officially labeled anyone associated with that house as a suspect in the Nancy Guthrie case. We're just looking at a confirmed clash between two reports. But this mismatch proves one thing. There are secrets about that house that the public hasn't been told yet. Either one or both of these journalists is missing a piece of the puzzle. Federal agents know the truth, but they're staying quiet. Laura's story actually sits right in the middle of both versions. Her comment about the neighbors leaving right around the time of the event fits both theories. It doesn't actually clear up the confusion at all. It only makes things more complicated. We're tracking this minute by minute. If the facts become clearer, we'll update you instantly. Let's look at everything Entin shared on March 17th. Since that empty house wasn't the sole lead he provided, agents began questioning locals regarding several different investigative paths all at once. Combined, these clues illustrate exactly how authorities think the area served as a base of operations throughout the month leading up to Nancy's abduction. Beyond the rental, Entin mentioned that detectives were very curious about the local construction sites in the foothills, and they weren't just asking general questions. They wanted a list of every laborer and builder who had a valid reason to be there leading up to January 31st. Entin said they were demanding names for every single person on those job sites. A local resident said her friend, who's currently building a house, was approached by federal agents to hand over a full roster of her crew. Consider the strategy behind that move. Federal agents verified this was a planned kidnapping. A predator tracked Nancy, mastering her daily habits. This individual scouted the community prior to February 1st, whether in person or by watching from afar. That January 11th doorbell footage, which Nancy's relatives highlighted as a crucial moment, proves a stranger stalked her property 3 weeks before she vanished. Consequently, the Bureau is currently cataloging every single person who had a valid reason to be in the vicinity while the suspect was lurking. They are checking off every innocent worker from that roster. This method of narrowing things down is exactly how you identify the one person who had no business being in that neighborhood. Ex-agent Steve Moore went on the air with Entin and was very blunt about the meaning of these tactics. It's clear they are revisiting every single detail from the start. She sent me a message this morning. She mentioned that agents stopped by her place again with more questions about what she observed. She also checked in with a friend who's constructing a home near Nancy's. They were asking for a list of every laborer at that site. It makes me feel like the investigation hasn't really progressed past the first few days. At least, that was her impression. The thing that really caught my eye was their request for a list of every laborer and tradesman involved with that new construction nearby. In your view, what's the takeaway there? It's clear they are circling back to double-check their trail. Think of it like that car key comparison I mentioned. You misplace your keys and naturally start by checking the usual spots in your place, only to come up empty-handed. So, you start over, retracing every move while asking yourself which jeans you had on or if you left them in your bag or something similar. You then dig a little deeper. By the time you're on the third or fourth pass, you're looking in places you normally ignore, like ripping the cushions off the sofa or tearing apart the bedding. You just keep diving further into the details. While some might wonder why federal agents didn't start there, the point was made quite clearly. Revisiting the past is how you move the case forward. If detectives are revisiting a previous scene with fresh inquiries, it suggests they've received a tip that forces them to view that well-known area in a whole new light. On March 20th, local law enforcement verified this to the media. A formal statement confirmed that authorities are actively vetting reports of odd behavior in that vicinity. It is officially on the books. The search is on. We should consider the perspective of a specialist who analyzed this exact situation and outlined the likely investigative process. Bob Krieger, a former SWAT lead for the county, brings much more than just basic knowledge to the table. He is intimately familiar with this region, the local landscape, and the specific way police maneuvers are handled in upscale communities like the Catalina foothills. During an interview regarding the empty house theory, his feedback was blunt and focused on the tactical reality of what such a location offers a criminal. Krieger noted that these sites often serve as a base of operations or a setup point for those involved. It gives a perpetrator a plausible excuse for being in the area at odd hours. It's a tactical disguise. A person staying in a short-term rental doesn't draw much attention. They can hang out on the sidewalk or just sit in their car in the driveway without causing alarm. They can watch from behind a curtain because they have a legitimate excuse to be present. Without a rental agreement, a vehicle on site, or a name listed, a newcomer sticks out like a sore thumb. A lease lets you disappear into the crowd. Krieger detailed how a lookout could track everything: the local traffic, people's schedules, and specifically Nancy's routine, like her wake-up time and whether she returned home by herself. At 84 years old, Nancy Guthrie followed a predictable path. She relied on ride shares, attended religious services, and regularly met her relatives for meals. On the evening of January 31st, she arrived home. Executing a kidnapping from a secured residence before dawn on a set day takes a level of planning that only comes from studying a target's daily habits. Then Krieger offered a point that I find to be one of the most crucial professional observations shared throughout this entire investigation. Such a spot, shielded from the neighbor's view, could easily double as a hub for installing monitoring gear if someone was so inclined. One could hide devices within the building or on the grounds quite easily. To be clear, Krieger isn't claiming this definitely took place. He's explaining the exact logic federal agents use when they sweep a site like that. He's highlighting what the lab techs are hunting for. Let's break down the scientific evidence trail. Essentially, any place where a person has spent time becomes a chronological log for forensics. It's never a matter of if they left something behind. The real issue is the type of proof found, the quantity, and how it links to other parts of the case. When looking at a surveillance nest, police focus on 5 main classifications. First up is physical trace material. Humans are constantly dropping bits of themselves, like hair, skin, and fabric fibers, or leaving biological marks on knobs, switches, and countertops. Should several individuals have occupied that house for a few weeks, every single one of them would have left behind a trail of physical indicators inside. Any area that felt a human hand is a goldmine for data. The most important thing to remember is that this microscopic evidence isn't easily washed away. Even if someone scrubbed the place top to bottom before leaving to hide their tracks, they'd still leave a lingering scent. Chemical sprays can light up biological stains that were supposedly cleaned. Specialized labs are able to pull genetic profiles from a lone hair found behind a trim board after several weeks. The federal facility in Quantico is one of the most advanced tech centers on the planet. While a normal person sees a vacant, tidy home, a professional sees a narrative written in DNA. Moving on to the second group, monitoring technology. If the theory holds that the rental was a lookout, the occupants might have set up recording devices to capture sight and sound from Nancy's yard or the road out front. The vital piece of the puzzle regarding spy gear is the physical evidence that remains even after the hardware is long gone. We're talking about brackets, sticky residue from mounts, wire tracks along the floor, tiny holes in the plaster, or scuff marks on the sills where a lens was positioned. These signs aren't hidden from experts. They are precisely what the technical team looks for. Plus, there is a virtual trail that stays behind even when the physical items are pulled. If those tools used the house's wireless signal, and most do these days, then the router or the service provider likely still has a record of those connections. This includes hardware IDs, internet addresses, specific login times, and data consumption habits. While the camera might be missing, its electronic ghost is still there. Now for the third category, digital footprints. Any gadget phones, computers, or even smart cars leaves a trail when it goes online. The internet company keeps a log of all activity at that address. With a warrant, authorities can identify every single device that accessed the web there and at what time. Using those unique identifiers, police can often track down the actual hardware and link it back to specific buyers or user accounts. If a person on site purchased the gear seen in the footage, like that 25-liter Ozark trail pack, the feds mentioned that sale might be sitting in a searchable database. High-tech investigations also rely on GPS tracking. Smartphones are constantly logging where they are, even if the owner thinks they've turned off the location settings. Applications are always communicating with cell towers. If a phone stayed put near that rental for hours on end while someone was keeping watch, that behavior is recorded in the data logs. We're just outlining what could possibly be found if a house was used as a base, as Krieger suggested. There's no confirmation that this has happened yet. The fourth group covers behavior and witness accounts, where people like Aldine Meister and Laura are key players. What they saw isn't just hearsay, it's a set of hard facts that help detectives piece together a schedule of events surrounding that empty lot. About 3 weeks before the crime, Meister spotted an unknown male concealing his features and eyeing Nancy's place. This was around mid-January, lining up with the 11th, a date both the family and the feds find critical. Laura saw that the car had disappeared around February 1st and called it in. When detectives link those witness reports to hard evidence on site, such as boot prints by the windows or signs of a lookout post inside, the neighbor's story evolves from simple gossip into verified proof. Having several different people from various spots pointing toward the exact same place at the same time creates what experts call a convergence of facts. The real power here is that these folks couldn't have compared their stories beforehand. Part 5 covers the biological traces and genetic testing results. It is clear that the genetic material found at Nancy Guthrie's place is a mixture containing DNA from at least 2 people, neither of whom is Nancy or her family. That sample is currently at a private lab in Florida. The Puma County Sheriff talked about the difficulties of pulling out a single identity from a messy, mixed-up sample. Probers are also trying family tree DNA searches on the glove, which didn't trigger any hits in the system. Former FBI man Greg Rogers told the magazine that they are digging into family DNA right now, but we won't get any official updates until they have a suspect in custody. The link between that empty house and the DNA evidence hasn't been proven yet. However, the path the detectives are following is quite obvious. If any biological material found at that rental house matches the DNA from Nancy's place even a tiny bit, the solid link between that building and the crime is set. The Bureau is now in the best spot to confirm that. Section 6 deals with the money and the paper trail. Someone had to rent that place. That means a contract was signed, a deposit was made, and money moved through checks, wires, cash, or phone apps. Every single cent spent leaves a digital footprint that can be traced. And federal power allows them to force landlords, banks, and rental companies to hand over those records. Detectives are digging into the rental agreement signatures, checking if those names belong to actual people, and analyzing if the money trail leads to a legitimate individual or was laundered to hide its origin, seeing if power, water, and web services were registered to a single persona or various aliases, and noting if they paid in greenbacks, a major red flag for an expensive luxury estate in the Catalina Mountains. If this house was a staging ground for a professional job like the one Bob Keir mentioned, then whoever set it up either made a sloppy mistake with the money or went to extreme lengths to hide it. Both tell the cops something important. A simple error gives them a lead. Using intense secrecy to avoid a paper trail is a specific behavioral trait, and in federal kidnapping cases, those habits become a key part of the criminal profile. We should revisit the building projects nearby, as this perspective offers a vital clue that many people overlook. Ongoing renovations in a wealthy suburb provide the perfect tactical cover for someone wanting to watch a target. It generates camouflage. It explains why strange trucks are parked on the curb. It justifies why random men are suddenly wandering around, inspecting buildings, or just lingering on the pavement without drawing any suspicion. If a suspect used that rental as a base while several homes were being built nearby in January, that activity would have allowed them to stay hidden for a much longer time. Extra people walking by just blend in. A strange car doesn't set off alarms like it would on a silent street where everyone knows each other. This is why the FBI is so focused on getting worker names. They are putting together a master list of every single person who had a legitimate reason to be in that neighborhood while the victim was being watched. Anyone on that list who has a solid alibi and checks out is crossed off. This process of elimination helps find the people who were there but shouldn't have been. There is one more detail to consider. If someone used the construction as a mask, posing as a worker or a contractor to blend in without being on a crew, the gaps in those company records become major clues. It might be a name that is missing from the books, or a face that people saw but doesn't show up on any official payroll. Former FBI agent Steve Moore laid out the big picture perfectly. The return to the street, the focus on the empty house, the worker lists. It all shows an investigation that has fresh leads and is moving fast. This is real progress. Before we look at what the Bureau knows about the genetic evidence, let's look at the Cryer theory once more because there is a part of it that is often ignored. Cryer specifically mentioned to Parade that a spot like this could be used to set up spy cameras without anyone ever knowing. A lens aimed at Nancy's driveway from across the street wouldn't need a clear view from the road. It wouldn't even require anyone to be in the house while the camera was running. It could stay on using batteries or the house's power and send video files over the web. You would never catch the person watching because they might be miles away at the time. That is the professional setup Cryer is talking about, not some guy sitting in a car. This is someone who figured out the surveillance issues weeks before the crime happened. Who tracked her departures, her returns, and the exact second her lights flickered on? Who waited until the streets died down, observing long enough to realize a Tuesday evening in early February offers a tiny 30-minute gap for a crime? We need to be extremely careful regarding the genetic evidence found, since this remains a cornerstone of the entire manhunt and requires total factual precision. Point 1. The genetic material found at Nancy Guthrie's home is a blend. This was confirmed to NBC News by Sheriff Chris Nanos himself. Those samples have DNA from multiple people, and it does not belong to Nancy or her family. It is currently being analyzed at a private facility down in Florida. The sheriff said their lab is hitting some snags. The way the samples are tangled together makes it much harder to run them through the national database or use standard comparison tools. Nanos mentioned that this problem could be solved quickly or could take as long as a year. Point 2. DNA was found on a glove about 2 miles from Nancy's house. That glove looks just like the one the person on the doorbell cam was wearing, but it didn't trigger any matches when they ran it through the system. The person's profile isn't in the federal database, meaning they don't have a record. But that is not where the trail ends. Detectives are utilizing advanced forensic ancestry tracing, the very strategy that unmasked the Golden State Killer without an existing profile match. This process maps out entire lineages from small biological traces to pinpoint a specific person. It depends on biological material plus specialized heritage archives. This case possesses both resources. Former Bureau Specialist Greg Rogers informed the media that he believes extensive relative-based testing is currently happening with the evidence recovered from the house. There won't be any news about it until they've identified a suspect. The Bureau doesn't talk about what goes on in the lab. They only talk when they make an arrest. The empty house ties back to this DNA question in one very specific way. If DNA from that rental house matches any part of the mix from Nancy's place, even a partial genetic hit, the link to the night of January 31st is solid. That is the question feds are now asking. They know what they found when they searched that house, even if we don't. We do know a rental in Nancy's neighborhood was emptied right around the time she was taken. Exactly when they moved out is still a mystery, because 2 different reporters have given us clashing accounts either before or after February 1st. Neither story has been fixed. Neither reporter has backed down. 2 different neighbors, without talking to each other, pointed their fingers at that same property. Aldine Meister said she'd been wanting the cops to check that house before any media ever showed up. Laura saw the car was gone and called it in because it just didn't feel right. These 2 ladies had lived on this block long enough to spot anything that seemed out of place. Speaking with Parade magazine, former Pima County SWAT leader Bob Kriegier broke down the site's tactical value, suggesting it likely functioned as a nerve center for the people who pulled this off. He explained how easy it is to plant bugs without being noticed. A person could track every move Nancy made just by playing the part of a quiet neighbor. A simple lease turns a total ghost into a local. 7 weeks in, federal agents hit that street again. They had very specific questions about the empty rental. Agents wanted a list of every tradesman working nearby right before Nancy vanished. Local sheriffs later confirmed this development during an official sit-down with reporters from Fox News Digital. Police are vetting every tip about odd behavior in that zip code. We are still in the dark about what agents discovered inside. It is unclear if they found hardware marks on the windows. Nobody knows if the internet logs show strange logins from late January. We also have no idea if forensic samples from that unit link back to DNA found at Nancy's place. It is a mystery if they found the tenants yet. We have no clue what they said. We cannot say if they are off the hook or if they are now the primary focus. When Newsweek reached out, the Phoenix Federal Branch issued their standard response. They refused to discuss active cases. That is the standard operating procedure. It is how you safeguard a legal trial before handcuffing a suspect. Yet that quiet, professional, and calculated refusal to speak is actually a clue. You would hear a clear rejection if that specific home had been searched and cleared of any involvement. We would likely have a clear answer if that conflicting report about the property had been settled for good. Federal tight-lippedness regarding a piece of evidence doesn't imply a dead end. Teams don't circle back to a block 7 weeks into a kidnapping probe to grill people about one house if they are empty-handed. They went back because a lead, a document, a forensic finding, or a witness's sudden recollection dragged them back to that pavement, back to that porch, and back to where a missing vehicle once sat. Nancy has been gone for almost 2 months now. Consider the scale of this. 8 weeks of massive federal spending, intensive lab testing, endless questioning, court orders, video review, and genetic ancestry mapping. This manhunt has evolved significantly since February 2nd. It has moved way past the status of February 15th. It isn't stuck in March 1st. Every 7 days, the team uncovers fresh details. Keeping those findings confidential is exactly how you construct a solid, airtight prosecution. Nancy's kin refuse to quit. Savannah Guthrie and her siblings are making a public plea for anyone with info to speak up. They want people to think back to January 11th and January 24th. Detectives believe those 2 specific days hold the key to what happened. Those timeframes were chosen for a reason, backed by hard data and solid leads. That $1 million reward is still on the table. Calls are still flooding into the federal tip line. If you frequented that area, leased a spot in the Catalina Mountains, or were a tradesman who spotted a red flag, contact the authorities. If you recall an unfamiliar car without a matching face, they want your call. This isn't a cold case. Far from it. Behind every major case like Nancy Guthrie's is a lesson that reaches far beyond one neighborhood, one family, or one terrible night. It reminds us that evil does not always arrive with noise. Sometimes it studies, waits, blends in, and counts on people being too distracted, too doubtful, or too afraid to speak up. That is why awareness matters. That is why community matters. The people who noticed something unusual were not detectives. They were ordinary neighbors who paid attention, trusted their instincts, and chose to speak. In a world where many have learned to look away, that simple act of concern becomes powerful. It can protect lives. It can move an investigation forward. It can become the difference between silence and truth. This story also teaches us to never dismiss small warning signs. A strange vehicle, an unfamiliar person, a sudden move, an uneasy feeling. These details may seem minor in the moment, but together they can reveal a much larger danger. Safety is not built by gates, wealth, or cameras alone. It is built by human vigilance, compassion, and courage. Most of all, this case is a reminder that every missing person is more than a headline. They are someone's mother, grandmother, friend, and whole world. We owe them attention, we owe them action, and we owe them the truth.